In this video, we're going to be focused on intensity. Now, I have some colors laid out here that lay out like a spectrum of intensity. Now, we've defined hue as the name of the color, and we've defined value as how much light hits your eye. Now, we're going to define intensity as how much color is in the light that hits your eye. So if we just look at these yellows, we can say this is the yellowest, right? Because the most yellow is bouncing off the page and interacting with our eyes. And then maybe this one a little bit less and a little bit less. And then over here it starts to get brown and tan, and all the way over here we have straight up brown. Now that's what happens to yellow when it gets dark, it turns brown. But that's not necessarily what happens when purple gets dark. So over here, purple is brightest in the dark, and yellow is brightest in the light. Now, intensity, brightness, saturation, chroma, they all refer to the same thing, how much color is in the light that hits your eye. You don't have to wrap your head around that 100% right now, but that is the definition, and eventually that will start to make sense to you. But what we want to do is start sorting for intensity. So what we've done in the past is we've sorted for value. And sometimes we were like, okay, one hue and 4 different values just to get our feet wet. And then we were saying 3 values with as many hues as we can cram in there, and that's going to be good. That's one of the most practical sorts you're going to be able to do. But if we're sorting for intensity, we want to look past hue, we want to look past value, and we just want to look at whatever color it is, whatever value it is, how much color is hitting our eyes. So we're going to have some categories. But right now, to start, what you want to do is sort for, like, let's say, okay. So colors that are fully saturated would be the highest intensity you can find. So let's start there. And these are just the ridiculous colors that are so bright, if you tried to mix them, if you're a painter, if you tried to mix them, you wouldn't be able to. All right? So they're so bright that they aren't really much fun. They're not very interesting, and they're not very useful. Here we go. That's the one I'm looking for. So very, very high intensity is referred to as fully saturated. That'll be one of our standard terms. On the other end of that is going to be colors that are very, very low in intensity. So anything that you can associate with brown, tan, gray, anything dull. Colors like this, and we can go cool, we can go warm. Any of these guys, let's get rid of that. We could maybe go away with something even as red as this. But for the most part, now that's way too bright for what we're talking about. But the term for these colors is going to be called chromatic gray. And that just refers to, in some ways, it's like if you're painting, you can think of a color that is a gray first, and then you mix a little bit of some brighter color into it, and this is what you get. Very, very low. We don't want to go so low that we end up with a neutral. And I have some neutrals over here to just be able to make the comparison. See, this is really a neutral color. All of these, you can say another way to think about it, it's really dull, but it has a temperature. But we're trying to avoid neutral colors, and we're just trying to keep things on the low side. So what's in between is pretty much everything else. If it's not fully saturated, crazy bright, and it's not chromatic gray, It's what we're going to refer to as muted. And I know that that's a terrible term, but it's the term that they use in one of the books that I like, and we have to call it something. So rather than make something up, we're just going to connect it to a book that I think is good on the subject. And so anything in between is going to be in play. So if I get rid of all these and just grab a big pile of color, I haven't even sorted through these yet. Who knows what we're going to get when we go through these. But I'm just going to hold them up and I'm going to say, okay, well that looks almost neutral, but I'm going to say chromatic gray. Here, let's do this. And we'll just make piles. Muted. Muted. That's just plain gray. Now these are grays. Muted, muted, chromatic gray, muted. Most of it can be muted. Muted, chromatic gray, chromatic gray, chromatic gray. Hey, some hardware store stuff, chromatic gray. That's kind of bright. If you decide it's too bright, you could put it in the fully saturated category, but I would say it's muted. Chromatic gray, chromatic gray, chromatic gray, muted, 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 chromatic gray, muted, chromatic gray, chromatic gray. It's on the high side, but it's still probably, we could say it's muted. Chromatic gray, muted. That's a tricky one. I'm going to go with chromatic gray. It's kind of a gray purple. And another way to think about chromatic gray. Now that's probably fully saturated, so that's going to go somewhere else. There we go. Chromatic gray, fully saturated. When it comes to intensity, especially the grayer colors, people have a hard time distinguishing between them. And sometimes it helps to have like adjectives and different words that you can make comparisons. Maybe that's a little high for muted. But one thing that I've found works is everyone's human skin. Everyone's skin is chromatic gray. So if you put your hand on the chromatic gray pile, as long as none of the colors in the pile are brighter than the colors on your hand, you're probably okay. And over here, everything in this pile should be brighter than your hand. And that tends to work pretty well. But there's other ones, and people need to just take some time and maybe write down some words and think about it, and think about which ones they want to make associations with. Off the top of my head, I'm having a hard time remembering some of the other ones. The skin tone one works good. This is a gray with a little color mixed into it, whereas this is a color with a little gray mixed into it. Those are also good ones. And I could just keep going. Every single color on the table goes in one of these three piles. Let's say this is our fully saturated pile again, with a nice bright yellow and a nice bright red. But that's that. This is the most difficult element or dimension of color to deal with, because you have to look at how much color there is, or how much color there is in the light, not how much light, and not what color. This group is all the colors. This group is all the colors, but we're just trying to keep the intensity low here, in the middle here, middle to high, and then high on this side. Words like heather have worked in the past. If you think about like a heather fabric, that works well. Colors that are grayed down. Tinting and shading, those aren't really terms that I've ever found really helpful, but sometimes people can make those work. That's a nice purple, chromatic gray. So when you're sorting for intensity, you just have to be specific about what intensity you're talking about. You don't have to be specific about anything else. So if you're going to be practical about like this is an exercise in understanding intensity. It's not a super practical thing to be doing, because now what we have to do is take all of our muted colors, and in order to be practical about them, now we have to sort them by value. So get rid of these other ones, and let's see what we've got in terms of value. We have a dark. I need to make some room here. We've got a dark, we've got a middle. That's a nice combination right there. There's a middle. Got some more darks. So now we're starting to get to a place where we can set up a scenario where we can do some practical things with our intensity sort. But you can separate them for a little while, but in practical terms, you're never really going to be able to separate them for long. If you're painting or something, you're usually way more focused on value first, and then you can start bringing in some controls over your intensities. For now, though, it's an exercise, and we're just trying to keep things, learn how to keep things under control. So you can see, oh, there's a dark that doesn't really, well, maybe it belongs back there. But so we had intensity, and now we took that these are all muted colors, we're sorting them by value, and so we have some nice lights that I've been keeping in my hand here, and that's going to be pretty good. Maybe this one is a little bit too light for that group. Yeah, it's pretty good over here. But then you can do that with all your groups. So you can sort these by value as well. We have a couple deep darks. We have a bunch of light lights. So that's the idea. And that was a lot. But if you can get to the point where you have a pile of muted colors and there's nothing like this in the middle of it, you're going to be okay. And once you get there, then you can start sorting those larger piles for value. But when you're sorting for intensity and you have a lot of color, your piles are going to be huge, because intensity is very easy to identify once you're able to identify it. And since every color can be any intensity, there's just so much to pick from. It becomes very easy. But for now, that's going to be enough. We'll have another sort on another day.